At the far end of the ER's table, Frank Walker watched fellow patrons savoring their time, some pausing for walks or to place calls. Beverages and coffee were served and the festivity persisted, but Frank was engrossed in pondering over a surprising message left by an unnamed server. This message alerted him to the possible threat posed by Mark Lalia, who, according to the note, aimed to charm his spouse. The alert took Frank by surprise, and upon scrutinizing the note again, he saw his spouse dancing with Lalia once more. This worried him, particularly when they vanished from sight a second time. Frank resolved to step in, yet before he could rise, the music ceased and he observed them exiting the dance area. Comforted by this, he settled back into his seat, anticipating Lalia to escort his wife back. Instead, they approached Mark's table and Frank watched them engaging in conversation with him and his acquaintances. Shortly after, Lalia departed and his wife, after saying goodbye to Frank and declaring her affection, made her way to the lavatories. As Frank observed his wife navigate through the dining area toward the corridor leading to the lavatories, he sensed that something was amiss with her statement about heading to the restroom. The oddity was in her pause and declaration of love, suggesting her departure was for reasons other than visiting the restroom. Frank stood and followed her, having barely taken a few steps when Lalia and his associates, as the note had cautioned, rose from their table and blocked his path. Frank Walker earned his living by resolving dilemmas for various organizations. Weekly, he would fly to different nations to rectify enterprises and diverse entities that had encountered turmoil in their administration, operations, or finances. Routinely, Frank dealt with egotistical and dominating high-ranking officials who climbed the ranks via scheming, bribery, lies, manipulation, and coercion. Daily, he faced obstinate managers and executives who exploited and intimidated employees, boasting about their sheer ruthlessness. When Frank intervened in these situations to implement changes affecting people's jobs and well-being, he often faced resistance, bullying, and even threats. He once received threats from a narcotics syndicate for his involvement in relocating a U.S. manufacturing firm from Mexico to Alabama, yet Frank remained undeterred and the move proceeded. Excelling in his profession, Frank thrived when confronting selfish, ambitious, merciless, and perilous individuals. It was essentially his forte. Thus, when Mark Lalia, imposing yet inexperienced, and his group confronted him, Frank swiftly managed to reverse the dynamics, making them feel intimidated. Never had they been so candidly informed of the repercussions of their actions until Frank did so, and they quickly made way for him. With Lalia's associates no longer obstructing him, Frank rushed after Brooke. Upon catching up, she was nearing the establishment's rear exit. "Brooke," he called out. She either didn't hear him or chose to ignore him but continued her stride towards the exit. Frank increased his pace, lessening the gap between them, and called out once more, "Brooke, where are you headed this time?" Brooke halted, turned to confront her husband with an irritated and inquisitive demeanor, questioning Frank's presence there. Observing her, Frank realized her behavior was unusually distant and clearly vexed that he had followed her. "I'll inquire about the same matter." "What are you doing here?" he queried Brooke. Brooke pondered for a short time before responding to Frank, "I want," but halted mid-sentence. Frank peered into her eyes and inquired once more, "Where are you headed, Brooke?" Brooke diverted her gaze from Frank, thinking to herself that this situation shouldn't have unfolded, he shouldn't be present. "Frank," Brooke began to articulate once again, but ceased as she needed to deliberate on what she was going to disclose to him. She recognized that fabricating a story was futile. She was compelled to confess the reality. She had to inform him of her destination, although it would be uncomfortable for her and cause Frank distress. Earlier that evening, Brooke encountered Mark Lalia by happenstance. After exiting the restroom, she walked past Mark's table. He spotted her, rose from his seat courteously, halted her progress, introduced himself, and initiated a brief conversation. Subsequently, Brooke proceeded to her table to rejoin Frank and the others at their gathering. As the celebration was reaching its peak, the musical band made their entrance and commenced their first performance of the night. Shortly after the band started to play, Mark Lalia approached the guests' table. Naturally, everyone was thrilled that a local soccer player and sports icon had made an appearance. He was congenial, introduced himself, exchanged handshakes with all the attendees, captured some selfies, signed autographs, and then invited Brooke to dance. Brooke was astounded and declined his offer, but Mark persisted politely. The other attendees encouraged her, and Frank offered no objections, so she hesitantly accepted his proposition. Needless to say, Brooke was nervous as Mark escorted her from their group to the dance floor. However, once there, Brooke found that dancing with Mark was unlike anything she had ever expected. He was youthful, attractive, bold, a skilled athlete, and an excellent dancer. During their dance, Mark's touch resonated with her in a way she appreciated. He held her in her preferred manner, and he conversed in a way that was to her liking. He expressed sentiments she enjoyed hearing, charmed her, and from that point forward, she consistently accepted his invitations to the dance floor. As the night progressed, after several dances and growing familiarity, her attraction to him intensified, undoubtedly becoming a physical allure. Eventually, at the night's conclusion, he guided them from the dance floor to a secluded area where he embraced her, kissed her, caressed her, and shared his feelings for her. He proposed they go to his house for privacy and relaxation to discover one another freely. He vividly portrayed how they would spend the night together, deepening their physical connection, promising it would be an unforgettable experience, one she would always remember. Brooke was entranced, and as she sat with Frank and the other guests, she mulled over Mark's offer. She felt torn about leaving Frank at the party to accompany someone she barely knew to his home, yet the thought of being with Mark thrilled her. She realized her desire for him marked a deviation from her loyalty to Frank. Although she had found other men appealing in the past, it never went beyond simple attraction. This night was distinct. She longed for Mark's affection and yearned to surrender to the moment. Yet, she struggled with the remorse of betraying Frank's confidence and the promises made. To rationalize her decision, Brooke sought a convincing justification, one she could accept morally and hope Frank would comprehend. She opted to leave with Mark because he was not just a professional athlete and a local star, but also had an allure and a sense of honor that fascinated her. Mark embodied the ideal of a romantic dream, and he was offering Brooke an opportunity she found irresistible. She believed Frank would view it as a distinct adventure for her and would support her decision to pursue this connection with Mark, just this time. She expected he might be disappointed but would comprehend because he wasn't merely her spouse, he was her most trusted friend and partner, wishing for her to seize this singular chance with Mark. Brooke found solace in these thoughts, furnishing herself with justification she could accept and she hoped could also convince Frank. Yet, at her core, she recognized her choice to accompany Mark was driven by his bold assertion of her being his for the evening, sparking an instinctual longing she found undeniable. She determined not to miss out on such an exhilarating venture, reminding herself that beyond being Frank's partner, she was a woman with her own needs and wishes. With her decision firm, as the birthday dinner wrapped up and the gathering moved back to the venue for additional celebrations, Mark approached their table, inviting Brooke to dance again. Frank, clearly annoyed, resisted Mark's continuous requests for his wife's presence. Brooke adeptly navigated her husband's objections, agreeing to one final dance with Mark, pointing out her enjoyment of the tune. Mark expressed his gratitude to Frank for his patience before escorting Brooke to the dance floor's shadowy corners. There, Mark asked if Brooke was ready to leave. She confirmed with a laugh, admitting her capitulation to him unreservedly. As the dance ended, Mark led her back to their table to discuss their departure. He reassured her about her safety and vowed to address any concerns Frank might have, trusting his assurance. Brooke positioned herself at the rear exit, ready to depart with him. Yet their plan was thwarted as Frank unexpectedly showed up at the back door, indicating a flaw in Mark's scheme. He halted her exit, seeking an explanation. "Brooke, I'm waiting. Tell me where you're going," Frank demanded. Brooke mustered all the courage she could and replied, "Frank, I'm going with Mark." "Are you going with Mark?" Frank inquired, emotionless. "Yes, I'm joining Mark. He invited me to his place," she stated. Frank remained composed, questioning why she was going to his house, circumventing the door. "Frank, this is too complex to explain at this moment. I'll call or text you later to clarify what I'm doing, but for now I must go. Mark is waiting," she explained. Frank persisted in his calm demeanor, refusing to let her pass and dismissing the idea of a later explanation, insisting on understanding her intentions immediately. "Oh God, Frank, please let's not create a scene over this. Just let me go and I'll clarify everything afterwards," Brooke pleaded. "No, Brooke, I need you to explain to me what's happening right now," Frank insisted, elevating his voice. Faced with Frank's insistence, Brooke became defensive, retorting, "Frank, you don't command me. Move aside and let me go." "No, Brooke, you're my wife and you're not leaving until you explain your actions," Frank countered. Realizing Frank's determination, Brooke understood she needed to reveal her intentions. With a nervous sigh, she began, "Frank, I realize how awful this sounds, and I honestly can't believe I'm doing this, but I'm going to Mark's to spend the night." She hastily added, "But Frank, it's only for tonight, and he'll bring me back tomorrow." Frank didn't immediately respond to Brooke's words. It took him a few moments to realize that his wife had just informed him she was planning to spend a night with Lelia. However, he gathered his thoughts and replied angrily, "No, Brooke, you will not spend a night with Lelia. You're not going to the sleepover, are you? You're planning to be intimate with him, aren't you? Frank interrupted. Brooke avoided his stare, staying silent. Tell me the truth, Brooke. Is that your plan? Frank persisted, but Brooke remained silent, her eyes fixed on the ground. Brooke, I know I'm correct, he asserted. Brooke eventually replied, yes, Frank, you're correct. I'm planning to be intimate with Mark, she admitted. There was quietness in the hallway. Finally, Brooke looked up and noticed the confused expression on her husband's face. Frank, what are you thinking about? Frank Walker was a man who was not easily surprised nor easily shocked. But what his wife had just revealed to him deeply disturbed him. Even after reading the note that warned him this might happen, for a brief moment he lost his composure. What am I thinking? I'll tell you what I'm thinking, Brooke. I think this is utterly astonishing, just insane, that's what I'm thinking, he exclaimed to her. Brooke was startled by Frank's rare outburst. She had never witnessed such anger from Frank during their time together, and it frightened her. Oh God, Frank, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Brooke said, still unable to meet his gaze. Why, Brooke? Why are you doing this? Frank demanded. Frank, I know this might seem mad to you, but please, just listen, she implored. I'm listening, he replied. Frank, probably every woman fantasizes about a romantic encounter with a celebrity or someone wealthy and famous, Brooke said. Frank cut her off sarcastically, let me guess. Mark Lalia is your fairy tale prince or your knight in shining armor. Please, Frank, don't mock this. This is every woman's fantasy. Mark isn't just anyone. He's exceptional. He's a true gentleman, a star, and a celebrity. I want to live the dream every woman fantasizes about. So please, Frank, show me that you love me by allowing me this experience, she pleaded with her husband. Frank struggled to manage his emotions in this unbelievable situation. So tonight, you'll go to Lalia's, be intimate with him, and tomorrow he'll return you home. Then we'll continue as a happily married couple as if this encounter never happened. Is that what you're saying, Brooke? Frank questioned. It's not an affair, it's just one night. Yes, tomorrow I'll come back, and my dream will have come true. I will be happy and you will be happy because you supported me in this, and we'll move on, she responded, hoping Frank believed her. But upon seeing his reaction, Brooke realized things weren't unfolding as she had hoped. So you're discarding me to be intimate with your charming prince, who you see as far superior to me, he stated. Damn, Brooke, that really hurts. Are you implying I'm not special, not a real man? He asked. No, Frank, you are special, you are a real man, she exclaimed in distress. Well, Brooke, then what did you mean? He queried. I'm not a professional athlete or a celebrity who supposedly knows the secret to pleasing a woman sexually, is that it? Brooke looked down. There's more to it, she mentioned. Then what's the issue? Are you bored with me? Frank asked. No, Frank, you're the greatest, she insisted. But again, Frank interrupted, I'm the best, yet you still need someone else, he stated. Yes, she admitted, her gaze still averted. So tonight you acknowledge that the person you desire is Mark Lalia, he said. As she conceded, still avoiding his look. So you've decided to spend the night with Mark Lalia, engaging in a night full of passion, he concluded. It's not about love? I don't have feelings of love for him. But yes, I've decided to share an intimate moment with him and experience something a lot of women dream of, she stated firmly and with assurance. However, she quickly followed up, Frank, I'm not abandoning our relationship. You're my spouse and I'll never walk away from what we have, but tonight I won't be by your side. I'll be with Mark. I implore you to try to grasp my desires and requirements. Please, Frank, I beg of you, let's not create a dramatic ordeal, she implored. Frank inhaled deeply. Why, Brooke? Why do you believe I should be okay with you sleeping with another guy and then returning to me as if it's nothing, he questioned. It's because you've always approached me with an open heart and you've consistently respected my emotions, desires, and necessities with care and attention. And I trust that when you see how meaningful this night with Mark is to me, you'll manage your frustration and approach it as a calm, seasoned, cultured individual, she explained to her husband. Can I deal with it? Can I actually cope? Please make it clear to me how I'm supposed to come to terms with the fact that tonight you'll be in Mark Lalia's bed and he'll take you. How am I to face tomorrow when he drives up with you and I learn that you two shared not just a moment but the entire night together? How can I look at you knowing you've shared yourself with someone else? Explain to me, how should I process all this? He inquired. Frank, I don't have an answer for you. I just hope you can figure this out in your head and we can continue with our lives. I'm aware you're upset with me, but can't you see how crucial this experience is for me? She questioned. Brooke, what you're suggesting is you wish I'd simply swallow my pride and tolerate your escapade with Lalia, Frank remarked. This isn't a fling, she yelled, and no, Frank, I don't expect you to just be okay with it. I'm asking you to acknowledge my emotions and necessities and to reconcile with them because of your love for me and because you're my closest companion, my kindred spirit, and you wish for me to have this unique encounter and experience I might never have again. Frank, this is my plea to you, dear, she expressed to him. Frank mulled over Brooke's appeal momentarily. He struggled to understand how she could expect him to accept her intimacy with Lelia. The longer he pondered, the clearer it became that she failed to understand the seriousness of her actions and their effect on him and their bond. It appeared she was lost in a fantasy inspired by her interaction with Lelia that evening. He felt compelled to snap her back to reality. Brooke, what do they call a guy whose wife has relations with another man? He probed after thinking it over for a bit. Brooke struggled with the term. Exactly, Brooke. They refer to him as a cuckold, a man whose wife is involved with another man for pleasure. But I refuse to be made a cuckold by you and Mark Lelia, he declared decisively. Tears formed in Brooke's eyes as she faced Frank. So, you're not going to stop me? She asked. No, Brooke, I won't interfere. You're grown and capable of your own choices. Whether you decide to go through with this or not is in your hands. If you believe this is what you need, then proceed. Spend the night with him, indulge in what you call love and intimacy. I won't block your path, Frank interjected. I've already clarified this isn't about love. I don't love him, I love you, Frank. It's merely a physical attraction. I'm attracted to Mark physically, not emotionally, Brooke contended. So, you're distinguishing between love and physicality in your thoughts, Frank deduced. Yes, Frank. I'm spending time with Mark due to physical attraction, but I'll return to you because of our love. You're my spouse, my closest ally, my soulmate. What we have goes beyond mere physical connection, she reassured him. I won't argue over the difference between love and physical attraction with you, but as I've stated, I won't obstruct your path, Frank repeated. Brooke stared at Frank, pondering if he genuinely comprehended. Brooke, if this is truly your wish, pursue it, but... Frank paused. Before you go, we're ending our marriage right now. Brooke panicked. End our marriage? What do you mean? I imply that once you exit, our matrimonial bond ceases. We'll detach our rings and annul our union. The formal procedures will be addressed afterward, yet in my view, our marriage terminates prior to your departure, Frank elucidated. Before Brooke had the chance to retort, Frank proceeded. And this evening, when Lelia escorts you, I'll stand cuckolded, for you'll no longer be my spouse. No, no, no. I cannot undertake this, Frank. I simply cannot. Brooke yelled. We've concurred on this, Brooke. So, what is your verdict? He pressed. I'm uncertain, she uttered tiredly. Ridiculous. You're fully aware of your desires. You wish to spend the evening with Mark Lavalier and then return to me, Frank alleged. Brooke wept bitterly. Are you serious? If I spend just one night with Mark, will you end our marriage? She inquired, her voice quivering. Absolutely, he confirmed with utmost seriousness. Brooke swiftly transitioned from panic to fury as she realized her justification for spending the night with Mark disintegrated right before her. Frank, do my sentiments and feelings genuinely hold so low value to you that you would instantly terminate our marriage over this without affording us an opportunity to resolve and proceed together? She questioned. Brooke, there's nothing to rectify here. The knowledge that certain matters in life are immutable and my spouse being intimate with another man is among them. I won't consent to an arrangement where you're intimate with Lelia and afterward we continue our lives as though it's trivial, he stated. So, my feelings, emotions, and necessities are meaningless to you, she remarked sarcastically. Brooke, merely moments ago you departed and left me, effectively discarding me without any clarification. Had I not pursued and halted you, you'd currently be en route to Mark Lavalier's residence for an intimate night. Thus, evidently, my sentiments and emotions are inconsequential to you. Why then should your feelings and emotions hold any significance to me, he questioned. The gravity of her choice struck Brooke. Oh my goodness, Frank, I'm profoundly remorseful. It never crossed my mind, she expressed. Darn it, Brooke, don't claim you didn't contemplate it, because you did. All I could think about was you getting ready for Lelia and the sensuous activities he had planned for you, Frank began. You certainly didn't consider my perspective, why you left your destination and your actions, he articulated. Oh God, Frank, please trust me. I had no intention of departing without informing you of my whereabouts. Upon arriving at Mark's, I intended to message you, elucidating my location and action, she explained. Message me? Really? Frank laughed. So you're saying while you're in bed with Lelia, your intention was to message me? Frank, I regret leaving the gathering, but I chose to visit Mark Lavalier for some private moments, so I won't be returning home tonight. Good night and see you tomorrow. Is that it? Frank ridiculed. This is heartless, she remarked. Heartless, Brooke? It's heartless and astonishing that you made a momentary choice to abandon me, your husband, your closest companion, and your soulmate to spend a night with a man you've recently met, Frank conveyed. Brooke sobbed. What's truly heartless is your expectation for me to tolerate it as if it's insignificant. That's heartless, she protested. I'm so sorry, Frank. Sorry, I just didn't think, she stated. Well, Brooke, it's irrelevant now what you pondered or didn't and what you communicated or failed to because I intercepted you before you could leave and now I comprehend your intentions and you understand mine. We no longer need to guess. Now we must confront the reality, Frank said with resolution. Brooke gazed at Frank with a questioning look. And what's the key? She inquired. The essence is this, it's the exit and Lavalier awaits you outside. I presume he's growing impatient. The choice is yours, Frank decisively informed his spouse of 12 years. Without a moment's hesitation, Brooke declared, Frank, I won't walk through that door. I refuse to abandon you for him. I won't forsake our shared life for his benefit. I'm not that naive, Brooke explained to him. Frank observed her intently. Just a quarter of an hour ago, you seemed ready to leave through that door and accompany him. So what's different now? Or is everything essentially the same aside from the fact that you're hesitant to pursue a divorce? Frank inquired. Well, I mean, is it possible to assume that your urgent craving to be intimate with Lavalier has just vanished? Or are you planning to wait until next week when I'm in Europe to be with him? He questioned. No, why would you think that? Brooke exclaimed, raising her voice. Are you planning on being unfaithful to me when I'm not around? He pressed. No, no, no. I have never been unfaithful to you. I would never betray you. I adore you, she declared loudly. But earlier tonight you were on the verge of being unfaithful. If I hadn't intervened, you would be betraying me at this moment for the second time, Frank recounted. The truth struck Brooke forcefully and she was suddenly confronted with the reality of her actions towards Mark. Oh my goodness, no, no, no. What was going through my mind? She yelled. So, what occurred? He inquired. I'm not certain, Frank. I'm completely bewildered. I can't grasp how I thought it was okay to go with Mark, believing it wouldn't be wrong or upset you, she admitted. Frank listened, yet his doubtful look didn't escape her. She realized she needed to be utterly transparent with him. Frank, I honestly don't know what got into me. It all started when Mark came up to our table asking me to dance and led me to the dance floor. He was so bold and insistent, constantly expressing his desire for me and how enjoyable it would be to be together in a romantic sense. Then he held me close, kissed me, and started to caress me, and Frank, I didn't resist. I didn't push him away, she confessed, with tears running down her cheeks. So, you motivated him, Frank pointed out. Yes, I motivated him. I'm deeply sorry, Frank, she sobbed. Then I persuaded myself that leaving with him was the correct choice and that you would comprehend and not mind if I went with him. All I can articulate is that I recognize I've made a huge mistake, and I'm terribly sorry, she wept. Frank heard Brooke out and simultaneously pondered over the note the waiter had handed him. He reached into his pocket and presented it. Here, read this, he suggested. Brooke read the note, then gazed at Frank. Where did this come from? She inquired. The waiter handed it to me during our meal, he replied. Is this merely a trick he employs? Brooke wondered. That's what's written here, Frank explained. Brooke was astonished after reading the note. I can't fathom it, she remarked. He singled you out from the crowd and enticed you. He deceived you, Frank explained. Brooke repeatedly reviewed the note. Was what he did to me all just for amusement, she questioned. Yes, everything he told you was just for fun, Frank confirmed. Brooke felt devastated. She realized she was merely the target for this week's scheme, a prize to fulfill Lavalier's lust for married women. Last week it might have been a woman named Debbie, the following could be Sandy, but this week it's me. Brooke acknowledged her error in the distressing realization that she jeopardized her marriage. Frank, I feel nauseous, she uttered, turned, and hurried to the restroom. After throwing up multiple times, she washed her hands and face, seeing her reflection in the mirror looking completely worn out, mirroring the chaos of the evening. Exiting the restroom, Brooke saw Frank waiting by the exit. She approached him quickly and embraced him. Oh, Frank, I'm profoundly sorry. Please forgive my foolishness and naivety, she pleaded amidst sobs. Frank gazed at her and then uttered, Brooke, Laval caught you unawares. Then he charmed you to the degree that you believed engaging in intimacy with him would lead to no repercussions, that I would be indifferent if you engaged in a fleeting encounter with him. But now you've discovered the contrary. You now understand. So promise us we'll never find ourselves in this predicament again. Heading towards the exit, Frank noticed two of Lavalier's comrades were still present. Brooke, here, I need to converse with Lavalier's acquaintances, Frank declared. Please let it be. We don't require any further complications, Brooke urged. No, Brooke, I can't simply abandon us in this manner. And with those words, Frank departed, leaving Brooke by herself. Approaching Lavalier's companions, Frank said, "Gentlemen, we seek no trouble." One of his comrades expressed, "All right then, follow my directive. Inform your friend Lavalier that he was defeated today, that he's a failure. Inform him that Frank Walker will broadcast globally that Mark Lavalier is a failure," Frank commanded. Both of Lavalier's comrades gazed at Frank dumbfounded. "Sir, we cannot convey this to him. He'd annihilate us both," one remarked. "Do you prefer to confront me or him?" Frank inquired. "Sir, we wish for no quarrel with you," one replied. "Wise decision. Now, one of you use the phone and relay my message. Do it now and mention that upon my departure it'd be prudent for him not to appear anywhere," Frank instructed. One of the men grabbed the phone, dialed Lavalier's number, and relayed Frank's message. Frank didn't catch the dialogue but sensed that Lavalier was seething with rage because his friend advised him against any rash actions, and then the conversation ceased. "What was his response?" Frank queried. "He said he would end you," one of the men responded. "Okay," Frank acknowledged. "Oh, Frank, I vow to you, after everything, I'll never allow another man near me," she asserted. Frank stared at her briefly, then responded, "Okay, and when we socialize as we did tonight, I'll endeavor to assist you in maintaining that vow. I should have intervened before Lavalier ensnared you, but I failed. Thus this fault lies with both of us and also with Lavalier, for he ought not to have pursued a married woman. So, Brooke, I absolve you and myself, but not Lavalier, and I'll confront him eventually. Oh, Frank, I'm grateful for your empathy, but please, let's disregard Mark. We'll never cross paths with him again, and he's not worth the potential difficulty," she stated. Following her comment, Frank pondered why she didn't wish for Mark to endure any repercussions. After all, Lavalier nearly cost Brooke her marriage. Why wouldn't she desire him to experience some distress for ensnaring her in his scheme? "I'll contemplate," he assured her. Frank then inquired, "Do you wish to return to the festivity?" "No, Frank, let's head home," Brooke exclaimed. "Absolutely yes, let's just return home." Frank and Brooke proceeded back through the corridor, re-entered the restaurant, and with that, Frank, his two companions, picked up Brooke and they departed the establishment and the bar. On the street, Frank handed the parking stop to the valet, and then they, along with several other duos, awaited their automobile. During their wait, an SUV accelerated towards them, halting abruptly in front of them, and the passenger window descended. An irate Mark Lavalier was inside the SUV. "Come on, Brooke, you mentioned your desire to accompany me, so come on, enter the vehicle," Mark yelled. "She will not accompany you, Lavalier," Frank retorted. "I'm not conversing with you, elderly man," Mark yelled back at Frank. "Come on, Brooke, let's depart now," Mark persisted. "No, Mark, I can't accompany you this evening," Brooke replied to him. "Brooke, come here and enter the car, let's depart now," Mark yelled. "She won't accompany you. You were defeated in the game, you're a loser now. Leave this place, loser, and let us be," Frank informed Mark. Being labeled a loser in the presence of a crowd who were probably his supporters immediately angered Mark. "I'll prove who the real loser is," Mark yelled, exiting his SUV. Frank advised the crowd awaiting their vehicles to distance themselves as the situation might escalate. He then proceeded to the SUV's driver's side front, where he encountered Lavalier wielding a sizable semi-automatic pistol. Consumed by fury from losing Brooke and facing public disgrace, Lavalier was uncontrollable. Frank analyzed Lavalier's actions, bringing back memories of a spectacle in the Masai Mara, Kenya, where he observed a battle between a lion and hyenas over the lion's catch. Similarly, Lavalier had pursued Brooke for hours and then claimed her, intending to take her home for his gratification. However, before he could enact his plan, Frank intervened and rescued her. Now, like that lion, Lavalier was fixated on reclaiming her, indifferent to the measures required to accomplish his goal, even if it meant eliminating Frank. "Brooke will join me, and if you attempt to halt it, I will eliminate you," Lavalier declared. Frank retreated slightly, now standing roughly 3 meters from Mark, with his hands uplifted, palms forward, fingers stretched in a defensive yet non-threatening stance. "Lower the firearm," Frank requested. "You've disrupted my pursuit, and I'll end you." "Put down the weapon before it escalates," Frank suggested in a composed, assertive tone. "I'll display who's in trouble. I'll end you and then pursue your spouse," Mark threatened, aiming the pistol at Frank. So absorbed in his tirade and anger, Lavalier failed to notice Frank's subtle movement of his right hand into his trouser pocket, where he carried a Sig Sauer micro-compact semi-automatic pistol loaded with 8 rounds of Hornady critical defense ammunition. 1 in the chamber and 7 in the magazine. Frank, with a license for the SG pistol, was well practiced in its defensive use. Having not engaged in actual combat for years but with military experience involving direct engagements, Frank was prepared for this perilous confrontation with an armed and hostile Mark Lavalier. The resurgence of those memories instilled in him the necessary reaction for this life-threatening predicament. Therefore, with his hand in his pocket, Frank resolved to conclude this encounter by deciding to fire at Lavalier. The immediate danger posed by Lavalier's armed threat and proximity justified Frank's lethal response. Having decided, Frank calmed Lavalier's outburst and agitation. He quietened, regulated his breathing, and concentrated on his action plan. Effortlessly, he drew the pistol, positioned it to shoot, aimed at Lavalier, and rapidly discharged 2 precise rounds. The pistol's manipulation needed to be accurate, and the action completed within seconds to prevent Lavalier's potential return fire, a scenario Frank wished to avoid. As Frank focused on Lavalier and drew his weapon smoothly, suddenly, 3 fast shots were heard from behind him, to his right. At the same moment, Frank noticed Lavalier's frame shudder as the bullet struck him, and then he observed Lavalier topple to the ground, having recoiled from the unexpected gunfire. Frank wondered aloud, "What the heck?" and turning, noticed the assailants still pointing their handgun at Mark's prone figure. Frank swiftly regained his composure and confronted the assailant. "I believe you've done it. You can lower your weapon," Frank stated. "He was going to eliminate you," the assailant replied, lowering the firearm. "Yes, that's what he mentioned," Frank responded, then inquired, "Who are you?" "I'm an off-duty officer, and I'm in charge of security here," the assailant explained as they hastened towards Lavalier. "Oh, excellent. I'm relieved you're here," Frank expressed. "Yes, I'm thankful I'm here too," she responded. Frank and the security guard crouched beside Lavalier, who was alive and alert but moaning in agony from 3 bullet injuries. "What occurred?" Mark groaned. "You were fired upon. Remain calm," Frank instructed. "Was I shot?" Mark inquired. "Indeed, you were shot," Frank confirmed. "Who fired at me?" Mark questioned. "I fired at you, Mark," the officer confessed. Mark stared at the officer. "Marjorie," he uttered. "Yes, Mark," she replied. "Oh my gosh, Marjorie, why? Why did you fire at me?" Lavalier questioned, breathless. "Because you were about to murder this gentleman," Marjorie explained. Mark was panting heavily and bleeding profusely. "Oh God, it hurts so much. Please aid me. I've summoned the ambulance. They're en route." "Stay put and hang on," Marjorie instructed. Lavalier was gasping for breath. "I didn't intend to murder him. It was merely a jest," Mark stated, struggling for breath. "Pointing a firearm and menacing someone is no jest," Marjorie retorted. "Marjorie, you're aware it was a jest," he said in a faint voice. "Mark, how often must I tell you that your jest might result in your demise?" she replied. "I understand, but it was only a jest." "I was merely jesting," he wheezed. "Oh God, I'm so chilly. Why am I so cold?" Then he looked at Frank and pleaded, "Please, sir, I'm extremely parched. Could you fetch me some water?" Frank turned and called to the bystanders to procure water for Lavalier. Lavalier was losing blood rapidly, and Frank realized that even if the paramedics arrived immediately, nothing could be done to save him because he had bled out excessively. For a brief period, Lavalier continued to plead for assistance, but then grew silent, weakened from blood loss. After a few more moments, his breathing ceased. Frank checked for heartbeat, checked again, but found none. He had departed. Mark Lavalier had passed away. It was past 11:30 p.m. when the authorities permitted Frank and Brooke to exit the restaurant and bar. They, along with other eyewitnesses of the altercation and shooting, were interviewed by law enforcement detectives, special agents, internal affairs, and even an assistant prosecutor. Frank and Brooke recounted their interactions and involvement in Mark Lavalier's affairs, and Frank issued a separate endorsement of the off-duty officer's action to shoot Lavalier, publicly stating she preserved his life. But after a night that began with attending a birthday celebration and concluded with their entanglement in the homicide of a local sports celebrity, Frank and Brooke were heading home. They traveled in silence for a stretch, neither uttering a single word until Brooke disrupted the quiet. "Frank," she began. "Yes," he replied. "Are you regretful that you didn't end him?" she probed without hesitating. "Yes," Frank admitted. Brooke pondered his instantaneous and unequivocal response and detected the resentment in his tone. Frank was deprived of contentment and was irate that the scenario with Lavalier concluded with a female security officer committing the act. When Mark confronted them outside the restaurant, Brooke was certain this now constituted Frank Walker's challenge, and she anticipated that it wouldn't bode well for Mark Lavalier. Mark was a youthful luminary with an enormous ego, a volatile temperament, and a weapon. In contrast, Frank Walker was an experienced corporate tactician accustomed to undermining influential figures. Infuriated that this adult indulging in childish antics dared to attempt to usurp his wife directly before him, Mark Lavalier could not evade the repercussions. Brooke was fully aware that Frank was carrying a weapon and understood he had intentionally enticed Mark into a scenario where he would likely end his life. Informing Mark that he had been defeated in their game and labeling him a failure served purely as lure, and inevitably Mark took the bait, which doomed him. Thus, Brooke was certain Mark Lavalier was doomed before he even exited his SUV. Observing the clash between the man she might have loved and her spouse, she was deeply troubled because she believed herself to be the cause of Mark's demise. Had he not chosen her and had she not consented to accompany him, he would be alive. Yet, by some odd twist of fate, an off-duty police officer fatally shot Lavalier, mistakenly believing he was protecting Frank's life. This action inadvertently prevented Frank from having Lavalier confront the consequences of attempting to elope with his wife, yet it also spared Brooke the anguish of knowing her husband was the killer. "Well, I'm relieved you didn't kill him," she confessed to him. "Why?" Frank inquired. "Because it's preferable that the officer did," she explained. "Do you mean by the police?" Frank pressed. "Yes, and by the news outlets," she added. "If I had done it, both the police and the press would have sought to sensationalize it. However, it would have been a straightforward case of self-defense. He acted aggressively, brandished a firearm, and threatened my life multiple times, standing merely 3 meters away. Hence, it would have been a defensible act of self-protection to use lethal force. Regardless of the police and press opinions," he articulated. "Yes, but the press would probe and scrutinize why you chose to kill rather than injure him," she responded. "Indeed, it's their role to inquire, speculate, and offer critiques. Yet, the reality remains that he was equipped with a lethal weapon, posing a fatal threat. Even if injured, for my safety, self-defense would leave me no alternative but to aim for a decisive strike," he countered. "Oh," she uttered, pondering his words. "It will still be distressing in the media even if I hadn't been the one to kill him. Some fault will be assigned to me," Frank shared. "And they'll blame me," she acknowledged. "Correct, they will. So brace yourself for the scrutiny we'll face. Our attorney will provide assistance to a degree, but only so much. Rest assured, the media will spin the narrative to suggest his death was directly tied to you and me. We might face legal actions and disputes, but don't fret. We are equipped to manage them and will prevail. After all, he lured you, assaulted us, and threatened me, making us the victims," Frank elucidated. He then reminded her, "But bear in mind, he was a celebrated football player and a local hero. Here in our cherished South, such figures are revered. So, in the eyes of the media, he can do no wrong. Understand that for a while, all we will encounter in the press is the tragic tale of poor Mark Lavalier, portrayed as a victim of a jealous spouse leading to his death by a security officer. However, eventually, the true narrative of Mark Lavalier will emerge, and the media's frenzy will subside, losing interest in the saga of a sports icon known for seducing married women for nocturnal escapades. That's my wish for all of this to simply vanish," she declared. "In time it will," Frank assured her. They continued their drive in silence for a few moments until Frank broached a provocative question about her potential regrets over missing a night of passionate intimacy with him. Brooke, taken aback and offended by Frank's inquiry, shot him a glance incredulous at his audacity. After a brief pause contemplating how to respond, she firmly expressed, "No, dear, absolutely not." This was the deception Frank expected to hear. A simple no would have sufficed and seemed genuine. However, the extended silence and the look in her eyes, combined with, "Of course not," overly solemn, confirmed his suspicions. He realized she was reflecting on the loss of her fantastical experience and aimed to shield her disappointment from him. However, her gaze, tone, and word choice betrayed her. Yet, Frank was not taken aback, for he understood that the interaction had rekindled and shattered the notion that she was merely a spouse, that she was a person with the freedom to seek pleasure with someone other than her husband. While they danced, during their dance, Lavalier engaged Brooke in discussions about desires that are often left unspoken, even between spouses. Brooke listened, and his words ignited her curiosity. Lavalier persuaded her that the ideal way to explore these taboo desires was with a companion with whom she could be completely open, candid, and unrestrained, a partner devoid of emotional bonds, someone experienced in decadence, guiding her in discovering the sensual aspects of her nature. Thus, the groundwork for betrayal was laid, and Frank was aware of it. He recognized she was now receptive to intimacy with other men, despite her earlier vow to refrain from such encounters. This was merely a tactic to escape her current predicament. When Frank prevented her from departing with Lavalier, he noticed the change in her tone and saw it in her behavior. Her actions expressed a willingness to seek closeness with another, though she was not ready to act on these impulses just yet. But that was only for the time being. Aware of all these details, Frank acknowledged he could never trust her again. As they drove home, he pondered whether he could tolerate his distrust towards her and accept the likelihood that she might someday seize the chance to be with another man. Brooke would probably embrace this chance.